Hello, I'm of course Eddie Spuhghetti, retro horror host and Hollywood media mogul. And things are going pretty smooth on the production of Three Ninjas Return, so I thought I'd take a bit of a break and talk about something I've had on my mind lately, ever since I saw Jason Momoa fall headfirst through a catering table. Yes, it's a VHS tape, and yes, it's the Three Stooges in Orbit. Okay, I'm not going to get too sentimental here, but I did grow up on the Stooges, and they are a very big influence on my style of comedy. Bearing in mind their personal relevance, I still get the sense that they're a bit more obscure these days, and I actually question their future longevity. They've had a history with resurgences in popularity, but even with a feature motion picture reboot type project a few years back, it didn't necessarily bring them into the limelight again, as it did in the past.
Thank you so much for having us here at WWE Raw. Yeah.
First off, who are the Stooges? They were originally two brothers, Moe and Shemp Howard. In the early 1920s, they worked a vaudeville act with straight man Ted Healy at various clubs, theaters, and burlesque houses. A few years in, they add Larry Fine to their act, a very talented violinist and comedian in his own right, and now you have Three Stooges. But there's still that Ted Healy guy who happened to be a bit of a douchebag whenever anyone would point out that the Stooges were a million times more entertaining than he was. After some contract disputes and Ted-related bullshit, Shemp says fuck this shit and leaves the act. He'd actually go solo for several years and become a featured star in Abbott and Costello pictures. Reportedly, Shemp was so good on his own that he made Abbott and Costello nervous to a point where they'd request his scenes to be scaled down a bit. So while Shemp is doing good on his own, making perhaps the biggest comedic duo at the time shit their pants in unison, back in Stoogeland, they bring in who most would say is the quintessential member of the Three Stooges. Curly Howard, Moe's younger brother, joins the act, and in 1933, MGM signs them all to a contract. They do a few musical shorts, but they're sorta lackluster. You watch these things now and it can be weird to see Moe not in his leadership role, but instead having to answer to some guy who looks like gangster number 3. Anyways, a year later, the MGM contract is done, and everyone parts ways with Ted because he's a big boozer and a loser. Moe, Larry, and Curly make a deal with Columbia and officially become the Three Stooges, with Moe being the bossy leader, Larry keeping the balance as middleman, and Curly acting as an entity of his own. The numbers indicate the Stooges were in 220 films, but of those, about 190 were Columbia shorts. They were basically TV episodes for movie theaters, and considered by many to be their most popular work. Most people can say that they've seen at least one Stooges short on TV, but I'll get to that shortly. So the group started making shorts with Columbia in '34 and would continue production until the late 50s. At this point, TV is starting to weaken the demand for theatrical shorts, and Columbia would be one of the last studios to make them. In the years leading up to this, Curly stepped down due to a stroke, and Shemp came in to fill his spot temporarily, mostly because he wanted to make sure that Moe and Larry still had careers. Shemp's style was different, but he didn't just basically do Curly's bit. He took over being the most ridiculous one, but less of the youthful charm that Curly exhumed and more of a weirdo vibe. Curly eventually passes away, and the loyal Shemp remains with the group until 1955, when he dies of a heart attack, putting production in a standstill with 4 shorts left to be completed. Interesting to note here that this circumstance would lead to a method of filming new scenes involving a stand-in for Shemp, then combing around at scenes from past shorts, and new footage of just Moe and Larry together. The concept of having stand-ins or fake Shemps for specific shots would become very useful to a buddy of mine named Sam, or as most of you non-Hollywood folk would know him, Mr. Raimi. Columbia suggests to Moe and Larry to find a replacement through their own catalog of comedians, and they settle on Joe Besser, who perhaps becomes the least physical Stooge ever, but to his credit did his own thing and was nowhere near a Curly clone. So we're back to the late 50s now, and after 2 years of Joe's tenure, Columbia has cancelled the Three Stooges due to a lack of interest in shorts productions. The group starts to look at retracing their old roots and doing tours again, but Besser opts out due to personal reasons. Joe DeRita, aka Curly Joe, is brought on board, and as the group revamps things, their first revival is starting up thanks to television syndication. Basically, a lot of studios had a crap ton of these old shorts still in their libraries, and they realized that with some slight restructuring, they can become TV episodes. A lot of the kids watching TV at this point see many of these old shorts, like The Little Rascals or Harold Lloyd, but they specifically go apeshit for the Three Stooges. And their parents are like, yeah, I used to go to these shorts at the theater. Those guys are great, eh? And then Columbia is like, whoa, these guys can still make bank. Jeffrey, get me each of the Three Stooges on the phone. This led to 6 feature films, with the Three Stooges in Orbit being the middle of the bunch, but perhaps the most memorable. It is the closest to a horror-themed feature, which followed a trend in which several comedic duos and groups would put out at least one dark comedy in an attempt to get their own Meet Frankenstein. In the years that followed, it seemed as if there was a revival almost once per decade, but that sorta dwindled down in the 2000s. Still, they've been on TV ever since and continue to be watched by many different demographics. Back in 2016 or so, I was in a restaurant, and as I sat eating pâté de Galande while signing autographs, I happened to notice a little girl at a table nearby holding an iPad and watching a Three Stooges short. So there's hope, yet maybe, for the continuing love of their work. Now that you know a general bio on the Three Stooges, let's talk about this film of theirs. This is the 1995 home video release of the Three Stooges in Orbit and happens to be a re-release from when Columbia and TriStar were putting out Stooge short compilation tapes. Each of these featured around 3 or 4 shorts in no particular order of release date, and with that, 6 feature films with the Stooges were also released as part of this collection. While Orbit is technically a sci-fi story, it does contain some spooky haunted house with monsters elements going on. The Stooges are having trouble securing a hotel room for an extended stay, as every place they check out won't allow home cooking. This leads the boys to discovering a classified ad placed by Professor Danforth, professor, who is currently at work developing a magnificent submarine tank helicopter hybrid to pitch to the Navy, Army, or the Air Force. Upon arrival, he warns Moe, Larry, and Curly Joe that should they decide to stay in his mansion, they must be on the lookout for Martian spies, who attempt to steal his blueprints in order to destroy the world.
And this one puts it in orbit.
I think this guy's in orbit already.
The first act of the film, involving the boys looking for a new place to live and encountering a Martian intruder, is partially recycled footage from an unaired color TV pilot called The Three Stooges Scrapbook. The pilot was an entire half hour that included a cartoon, but as of this video's posting, it's considered lost. However, a shorter 14-minute cut was made for theaters, as most likely a pre-show feature or filler for drive-in audiences. Noticeable differences include a laugh track, extended scenes in the Stooges' apartment, and an alternate take of when Larry discovers the newspaper ad. The professor's surname was originally Doolittle, and his mansion looked a tad smaller than the film version, both using a different set for the main floor and distinct exterior shots.
And this one puts it in orbit. The model.
This guy's in orbit himself.
The butler was also named Nick and played by another actor. Most of the scenes in the mansion's guest bedroom are copied over, with differences being the reveal of the Martian intruder and the boys ditching the crazy professor afterwards.
Then you shall be the one to take my space carrier into orbit.
Much of the dialogue in the mansion scenes are copied over to Orbit, and the storyline of the boys preparing for their new TV show was also incorporated as a plotline for the film. Another source of existing footage came from Earth vs. the Flying Saucers to pad up the climax of a Martian attack on Los Angeles. It's a bit strange now that I think of it, because why the hell would the Martians really want this Earth-based technology when they already have an arsenal of anti-gravity spaceships? Holy crap, Mars, get your shit together.
Flying saucers.
The score is oddly creepy and very appropriate. Composer Paul Dunlap had already worked on several sci-fi pictures like Invisible Invaders and The Angry Red Planet, which a few stills of alien life forms from it are shown in the introduction of Stooges in Orbit. The usage is most likely due to the fact that producer Norman Maurer was involved with both films, and Moe's family, as he was his son-in-law. Legit, there's some good stuff here. You got 2 Frankenstein monster-looking Martians who secretly love to dance, and a total dick of a producer who gave me flashbacks of a similar asshole on the set of Time Cop 3: Daylight Savings Unit. Plus, the Stooges do have some really funny banter, and a lot of it comes off as improv, showing just how funny these guys can be besides the slaps and physical gags, and especially in the twilight of their careers.
Oh, that's where the pointy part belongs.
Yeah, how stupid can you get?
I don't know. Guess you can get pretty stupid.
Not gonna go into the rest of the film, I'll let you handle that yourself, but I will leave you with this. It's very campy, and it's pretty B-movie in tone, but I mean, come on, who doesn't love that like an autographed photo of myself? Now get out of here, okay? We'll do lunch.